Hey, what's up? Nick back. Welcome to Photoshop for the DIY musician, and this whole series of videos is specifically for musicians that want to learn how to create some of their own graphics and visuals, but don't have a lot of art or design experience and very little experience with Photoshop. And this is the first in a series of videos that I guess I'm just going to call Let's Make an Album Cover. And what we're going to do here is we're going to practice some album artwork techniques and learn how to make some beautiful album covers by recreating some of the ones that are out there and already been made. And it could be old, could be new, doesn't matter. Everyone's going to be a little bit different. And we're also going to be learning a bunch of new stuff in Photoshop along the way. So in this video, we're going to recreate an album cover for the band Tycho. This album is called Awake. And it's a beautiful but very simple cover, which means it's going to be a great place to start if you're relatively new to Photoshop. Also one of my favorite albums of the last year or two. Very cool cover, great sounding album, just really good music to put on and chill out and vibe to. Really good to put on the background while you're using Photoshop, actually. But anyways, let's jump in. If you want to download and use the exact cover that I have right here, there's a download link right in the video description. And let's jump into Photoshop. Right. So we got Photoshop open. First thing that we're going to do, we're going to make a new canvas. Now, whenever you're about to make a new canvas for an album cover project, you want to ask yourself, is this going to be printed? Is this just digital? Or is this also going to be something potentially in a larger format like vinyl? Because you really want to set that document size perfectly to start with. Because just in general with graphics, and sometimes there's exceptions to this, but you can always go big to small. You can't go small to big. So if I did my entire album cover in a smaller digital format, and then a couple months later, the band decides oh, we really want to kind of put this thing out on vinyl, my only option is to try and blow it up, which is always going to result in a little bit of image quality. So just keep this really simple. If you're going to do something that's strictly digital, you want to work in a size that's probably about 1600 pixels by 1600 pixels, and the resolution should be 72 pixels per inch. Now, as of recording this video, these are the requirements for services like CD Baby and DistroKid and other places that are going to, allow you to digitally distribute your music. And if you're going to do it on, something that's going to be printed, like let's say a CD, you'd want to switch over from pixels to inches. And do something like maybe, I always like to work a little bit bigger than I actually need. Now, an album cover when it's printed is about 4.75 inches by 4.75 inches. I usually just do something like 6 by 6. And now when it's going to be printing, you want to use the resolution of 300 ppi. That's because that's print resolution. Print requires a little bit of a higher quality than web stuff. And kind of, as you might guess, if I'm going to do something for vinyl, you'd want to do it in maybe something like 13 inches by 13 inches, which is a little bit bigger than what you actually need, but that's okay. Now, for this particular project, we're just kind of messing around, having fun. So we're going to go back to our original digital size. So we're going to switch back to pixels. I'm going to do 1600 by 1600. Resolution 72, and I'm going to click OK. And what I've got is basically a big empty white square canvas. Now I'm going to hit the F key because that's going to switch me into full screen mode. And this is usually the way that I like to work. And if you're completely new to the program, a couple little shortcuts that are really useful is if you hold down the space bar, you can then click and drag, and that lets you move your canvas around the screen. And also Command plus and Command minus lets you zoom in and out. Those are the two basic things you're going to do as far as canvas manipulation when you first start. So I've got this white canvas, and I'm going to move my toolbar over here because I want to be able to see my rulers at the top and on the left side. And if you can't see those, or if they're turned off, you can just go up to View and then turn Rulers on right here. And what I usually like to do is first make sure that this option here called Snap is turned on, and you'll see what that does in a second. I usually like to put what are called guidelines right in the middle, and you do these just by simply clicking and dragging from the ruler on the left, and you got to click right on the ruler. And this big vertical bar pops out, and I'm just going to drop this, and you'll notice that as you start to bring the line right towards the middle of the canvas, it kind of pops and locks in. There we go. And I'm going to do the same thing across the horizontal plane, and you just do that from the ruler at the top. And what I basically have here is guidelines that are just going to give me a little bit of an easy view as far as when things are centered within my canvas. And with this album cover in particular, because it's very kind of geometrically perfect, this is a good thing. Now, if these guidelines, they're kind of like a digital straight edge, so they're just there to help you line things up, make sure things are centered and that kind of thing. And if you ever want to hide them, they don't always necessarily need to be on. You can go up to View, Show, and then Guides is right here. And if you're on a Mac, the shortcut for that is just Command minus, and that just makes them go away or come right back. All right, so our canvas is set up to kind of mess around and try to recreate this album cover. Next thing that we're going to do, as you might expect, we're going to bring the cover in that we're trying to recreate. So we're going to do that by going up to File and Place Embedded. And this is usually the preferred method of importing images into a pre-existing project. So if I just go over to my desktop, it's right here. Now this is a super high resolution picture. It's about 4,000 pixels by 4,000 pixels, which is way larger than what we need right now. But regardless, it fits perfect and looks cool. And now we can kind of see that while the circle in the main, right on the album cover is not necessarily centered horizontally, it is centered vertically right here. And that's why we bring those guidelines in, because when we create this in a little bit, it's just going to be easy to get it right in the exact same spot. So now that we've got this here, and we can see over in our layers window, which is down here at the right, we have a new layer, which is this cover. And again, you can click this little eyeball icon, which hides it, brings it back, which we're going to be doing a lot of because we're trying to, again, kind of recreate our own. Just click the eye, bring it back. Easy enough. All right. Now, from this point, I mean, you could always do things, attack them in different orders. And, once you get comfortable with the program, again, you kind of tend to make your own workflow, and whatever works for you is cool. But for this, we're going to just start. I usually like to work from the background up. And when you first start working in Photoshop, ideally the end goal with album artwork is always to create something new, fresh, and original that, makes sense for your music or your band. But when you first start out, a great way to kind of practice and get better at stuff is to trace, basically, or recreate things that are already out there. So this is a great project, and, obviously feel free to kind of try to recreate some other album covers, and stay tuned for more videos coming up. All right, so like I said, working from the bottom up, we are going to start by taking this color. It's kind of like a tan cream color that is serving as the backdrop on this album cover, and we are going to fill our own background with that, which is this layer right down here, the background. So one of the most common tools that you use in Photoshop is the eyedropper, and that is right over here. It's 6 tools down. The icon for it looks like a little eyedropper, and its kind of sole purpose is just to sample color and let you reuse it elsewhere. So I'm just going to grab the eyedropper. I'm going to click here in this background. You notice a little ring pops up if you hold your mouse down, and that's showing you the new color versus the color that you have selected. And basically I had white selected just a second ago. And as soon as I release my mouse, that color is now selected. And you can tell that by right down here at the bottom of the toolbar. This shows my foreground and background color. And the one you typically care about more is the foreground color, which is this box right here on the top. So now that I've got this color selected, I am going to turn this layer off, the album cover, and we're going to click on the background layer right down here. And we want to just fill this in with color, and we're going to do that using a tool that's been around for a long time and a lot of other programs. And honestly, even if you've used something like Microsoft Paint, which is a dark and evil program, but it has something in it called the paint bucket, and it's still here in Photoshop. It is hidden when you first open the program. If it's the first time you're going in to find the paint bucket, it's behind the gradient tool, which is right here. So you have to click and hold and select the paint bucket tool, and then you just click, and it fills in that space with color. Now there's a handy shortcut, because you may find you actually do this more than you might think. Option Delete, at least on a Mac, fills in that background with color. It's the exact same thing as the paint bucket. It's just a little keyboard shortcut for it. So we're good. We've got our background filled in with the same color. Now let's turn that other album cover back on. And you can almost kind of start to see that if you turn that on and off, it almost looks like we're just turning that circle and the little symbols down here at the bottom off and on, because their color is exactly the same. So before we get into creating the circle, which is kind of the main part of the cover, this is a very kind of color-based album cover. And again, it's very simple, but the colors are really beautiful, and we want to make sure that we can use all of those exact same colors. So we could do this one at a time, as we go through. But what might be a good thing to do to, kind of first step here is to sample all of these colors and create what are called swatches. And swatches are, there's a window up here at the top right of Photoshop. You might possibly have colors selected, which is obviously very useful for some things, but usually I'm almost always in this window called swatches. And they're just like quick access colors that you can click on and use anytime you want. Now, if we go to our eyedropper, we're basically going to work from the bottom up, and we're going to sample and make a swatch for each one of these colors because it's going to make creating it a little bit faster and easier in just a second. So I've got my eyedropper right here. I'm just going to click kind of on this really dark, faded, desaturated purple here at the bottom. I'm just going to click once. All right. Now, again, bottom of our toolbar, we can see that that color got selected. And over in my swatches window, right next to the little trash can icon is the icon for a new swatch. So I'm just going to click. And you could name it if you wanted to. And in this case, it might be a good idea to name it something like bottom color. But really, at the end of the day, what you name your swatches is really up to you. And it's just whatever's going to help you remember it. And there we go. Click OK. And we can see in our swatches window, I now have a new box right here for bottom color. And now we're going to do the same thing for this next color. Click on it with the eyedropper. Click the new swatch button. I'm going to name this one something like second from bottom. And then I'm going to do the same thing for this next color. And now I'm going to go ahead and kind of fast forward because again, this is just doing the same process over and over again. And we're going to do the same thing for every single color on here. So when the video jumps forward in a second, I'm going to have swatches made for each one of these colors. So go ahead and do that yourself, pause the video, and then hit play when you're done. All right, so I've got all my swatches made over here. There's a total of 8 colors. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to make our circle. All right. Now we're going to do this using the shape tool, which is right down here. All right, you got to click and hold and switch over to the ellipse tool. And ellipse is going to let you make any kind of circles, ovals, that kind of thing. And we also want to select what's called a fill color. And we actually don't really care what color it's going to be. I'm just going to pick, let's say, a white. Now, fill, of course, is the color that the circle is going to be filled with. And then right here, we've got this thing called the stroke. Now, stroke is a border or outline around the circle. And we can see clearly on this cover that there is nothing like that. So we're just going to select this option here. No stroke. It's basically a little white box with a red line through it. All right. Now we're going to bring our cursor somewhere over here. Hopefully you can see it. Now in order to make a perfect geometric circle, we want to hold down the Shift key. And then I'm going to click and drag just like this. And it might not actually be the perfect size. That is all right. As long as it's somewhere like this, and whether it's on the canvas or off the canvas, it really doesn't matter. So we're going to make a circle, and then what we're going to do is we're going to select our move tool, and we're going to bring it just by clicking and dragging here towards the center. Now you'll notice that as you start to bring it towards the middle, it will actually jump and lock onto that center guideline, which is a good thing. This is that feature that I talked about a little bit ago called snap. And what it does is it tries to, lock to centers, lock to other like objects, and it makes doing, basic kind of compositions and layouts a little bit easier. But if you ever find yourself being frustrated by snap, you can turn it off because, sometimes if you're just trying to make like a subtle adjustment, it can be a little annoying. So you can turn it off. Now bring your circle right over here, and yours may be perfect, which is great. Mine is a little bit off, so I actually need to make it just a little bit bigger. Maybe you need to do the same thing or a little bit smaller. And what I'm going to do so that I can actually see the original circle as well as my own is in our layers window, right over here where it says ellipse 1. And again, we made a new shape, which means we have a new layer. Again, eyeball, turn it off, turn it on. I'm going to reduce the opacity, which is just like the level of transparency. And if I bring it down just somewhere that I can, maybe around 50 is probably going to be pretty good. I just want to bring it down to a place where I can see both. I can see the original and my own. And now anytime you have something in Photoshop that you just want to make bigger, smaller, rotate it, and do those kinds of things, It's called free transform mode, and there's a shortcut for it. It's one of the most common things you do in the program. Absolutely. Command T or Control T on a PC. And as soon as you do that, a bounding box appears around the circle. And in order to preserve the perfect geometric circle, you do want to hold down the Shift key and use the corner boxes, and then you can make some adjustments to that circle if you need to. And again, we want it to be about the perfect size, which right about there looks really good. Now, if you're trying to move this and you just want to do it in little baby increments, you can use the arrow keys. It's called nudging. And if I do left arrow, you can see it just moves it to the left, and the other ones work exactly the same. And now, as soon as I'm done transforming, I would click the check mark right up here at the top. Cool. And then I'm going to bring the opacity back up. And basically what I'm left with is I've got this big white circle in the middle of the album cover. And if we turn the original off by clicking the eyeball next to that layer, I can see that, we're getting there. It's actually starting to come together, at least structurally. All right, cool. So the next step is going to be to start putting all of these colors inside of this circle. And we're going to do this using a really cool technique in, I guess it's not really so much of a technique as a function in Photoshop called the clipping mask. Because we are basically going to make a series of colored rectangles, these exact colors, and we're going to place them inside of the circle so that they only display over the circle. And we're going to start with just one. Now, if I go to my shape tool, all right, and we want to switch over to the rectangle tool, which is right here. If I go to my rectangle tool, and obviously we know that we don't want this to actually be, white. We want this to be kind of with that deep purple. Now, you could start at the bottom, you could start at the top. Either one's going to work just fine. But the way that Photoshop works is that because I have this layer selected, Ellipse 1, if I go up here and start changing the fill color, that circle is actually going to change, and that's not what I want to do. I want to make a new shape. So what you've got to do is click and drag, and you want to make the rectangle first, kind of like this, and just try to sight it out. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect right now. All right. And once that rectangle is made right here, now I can go up to my fill, and you can select the colors inside the fill window, or you can also use your swatches window over on the right. Either one works just fine, but you do have to click on the color picker. There we go. So again, you've got to click this little icon. It kind of looks like a prism right at the top of the fill. Opens up your color picker. This is where you would manually select colors for your shapes if you wanted to. It also gives you access to your swatches. But either way is cool. All right. So I've got my rectangle made. And again, this is our first of 8. And what I'm going to do now is I want this rectangle, this color, to only display over the circle. I basically want to put it inside the circle. So this is really easy to do. If you notice that the layer order at the moment, that rectangle layer is above the ellipse, and that's what it has to be. It's got to be right above. And I'm just going to right click on the rectangle. And inside of my menu, I'm going to go down and pick Create Clipping Mask. And that's it. What a clipping mask does is it basically tells Photoshop that I only want the layer that I have selected to be displayed over the layer below it. In this case, only display the rectangle inside of the circle. And now that I've done that, I could use my Move tool, because I can see I left a little bit of white space here at the bottom. There we go. I also maybe, at least for right now, want to turn my guidelines off. So I'm going to do that using Command:, or again, View, Show, Guides, right up here. Now, in order to do this with my rectangles, I do want to make sure that I can see the original album cover at least a little bit. So I guess I'm going to go back to Ellipse 1 and reduce that opacity again, kind of like this. That looks pretty good. Now, the cool thing about this is that because I'm using a clipping mask, or this rectangle is kind of tied or within the ellipse, as I reduce the opacity of my ellipse, the opacity of the rectangle is also being reduced kind of at the same time. So I can see everything all at once, and I can kind of tell that my personal rectangle is a little too high. So what I'm going to do is go to free transform, which we did a second ago. And again, our bounding box pops up. Now, we don't really need to worry about keeping this a perfect geometric square or anything like that. So I'm just going to drag this top box right here down to where that border needs to be, which is right about there. Cool. All right, our first color is done. That looks good. Now we're going to move on to the next one, which is this color right where my cursor is, which is kind of a slightly lighter, again, equally kind of nicely desaturated, a little faded, kind of a light purple. So I am going to go back to my rectangle tool, and I'm just going to click and drag another rectangle. And now that I can see both, I'm going to try and do it right. I can tell I'm a little off. Oh well. All right, now I'm going to change the color of this one by clicking on the fill. And I'm going to use my swatches right over here. There we go. That looks good. All right. Now you notice how when this rectangle has been created and filled in with color, it's covering up the original one that we did. The original one that we, spent, all 5 seconds, like making sure it was the right height. So something we can do now is in the layers window, I'm just going to take rectangle 2 and we're going to change the layer order and put it underneath rectangle 1. Just click, drag, and there we go. Now it's placed right underneath that one. And so technically it's actually tucked a little bit behind the dark rectangle. And this is kind of how we're going to work going forward, because we're basically going to be tucking rectangle after rectangle underneath the previous one. And that's going to let us create this kind of nice, I guess, sort of like a gradient. Now what I need to do is I can kind of see that my color, or at least my rectangle, is maybe a little too tall. So I'm going to Command T. And we're going to drop that right there. And that's looking pretty good. Cool. Now I'm going to do one more. And then I am going to kind of stop the video, finish them up, because again, it is just doing the same thing over and over again. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know below, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. I'm going to go to my rectangle tool, and I'm going to make another rectangle. Wow. Spoiler alert. Plot twist. Okay. Cool. New rectangle's been made. I'm going to go up to my fill color, and what I want to do now is to select the next color, which is this. That looks pretty good, and actually looks pretty good as far as the height goes. And I'm going to take that layer, rectangle 3, and drag it underneath rectangle 2, and it's going to look just like that. And you're literally going to be doing this over and over again, for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more colors. All right, make a rectangle, make sure that's the right height, change the color, and then drag that layer underneath the previous rectangle you made. So it's basically going to count down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way down to ellipse 1. All right, so I'm going to stop the video and kind of knock those out really quick, give them a shot, pause it, and then start it up when you're done. All right, all done. I have all 8 rectangles created, which are each filled with their own unique color, creating this separation of color that we have in the original album cover. And as you can see here, they are all numbered 1 through 8, starting with 1, and then as you move down towards 8 right here, they are all set to be a clipping mask. Right, and we can tell that by this little down arrow next to each rectangle. And again, that's telling Photoshop to only display these rectangles inside ellipse 1. Now the cool thing is, if you did this right, which hopefully you did, it wasn't terribly difficult. If I turn that original album cover off and on right here, we can kind of see that while there's a little bit of color difference here, which we'll fix in a second, it should look almost exactly the same. And the weird thing, what's possibly making it look a little strange if you're trying to do that, is our ellipse 1. The opacity is probably still set to something a little bit lower. So click on ellipse 1, and we're going to make sure that opacity is 100%. Now if I do that with the album cover, the only thing that should really look different is the little kind of symbols here at the bottom, which is the last thing that we're going to do here in just a second. All right, looking pretty sweet. Now, like I said, next thing that we're going to do, we're going to create these little symbols down here at the bottom, which is basically just a little series of circles. To do this, first, let's click on our album cover layer because we are going to be making some new circles in a second. And the way that Photoshop works is that if you have a layer selected, in this case Ellipse 1, if I go to make a new shape, it's going to put it above Ellipse 1 and automatically make it a clipping mask, which is not what I want. We are done with clipping masks for right now, which, all right, cool. Now we want to click on that album cover. All right. And I'm also going to zoom in a little bit. So we're going to do some Command plus, and then the space bar to click and drag. And there we go. So as you might expect, we are going to make a series of little circles, and I'll show you a little trick that's going to make your life a lot easier as far as not only making them, but getting them all lined up and spaced perfectly. So we're going to go back to our shape tool, which is right here, and we're going to select our ellipse tool. Now, before we do the next step, do make sure that you have that layer selected that is the album cover, because if you don't, and you go up to change the fill color, it may change your entire circle or possibly something else. So we're going to click on fill, and then we're going to pick a very specific color, which is the exact color of these. We're going to do that by clicking this little our color picker icon right up here. And anytime your cursor is outside of the color picker, it automatically turns into an eyedropper, which is right here. Now, the caps lock, just so you know, if you ever run into this, the caps lock key in Photoshop, whenever it's turned on, changes the cursor from the default icon to more of a crosshair, which allows for like more exact precision, but you don't always need that. In this case, the regular eyedropper icon is just fine. And I'm going to click here, and that looks pretty good. And then click OK. And we are basically going to make one little circle. So what we want to do is bring your cursor maybe somewhere right about here. Hold down the Shift key, and we're going to try and make our own little circle that is about the exact same size, which that looks pretty good. And now I'm going to use the Move tool, which is right here. And I'm actually, at this point, just going to use the arrow keys, because that is going to let me move things around very subtly, like 1 pixel at a time. It's called nudging. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to take this one. It's about the perfect size. It could maybe be a tiny bit smaller, but we're not going to sweat 1 pixel for this. All right, so I've made this one ellipse, and I want to be able to quickly do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You know, about 10 more. Now, in Photoshop, you can always duplicate layers pretty easily, and you should really never be making the same thing twice if you have to. Going to right-click on Ellipse 2, and then there's an option here called Duplicate Layer, and what that'll do is it'll make yet another ellipse. That's one way to do this, and you could totally do that for all 10. But there's a little shortcut you can do that's pretty useful. It just lets you kind of very quickly duplicate or copy. If you bring your cursor on top of that circle you just made, and hold down the Command Option keys, you can just, you see how it turns into kind of a little black and white arrow? You can click and drag now, and just drag a new circle out, and that basically just made one quick little copy. And if I look in my layers window, I've got Ellipse 2, and I got Ellipse 2 copy. And if I turn that original album cover off, we can kind of see that we got 2. So anyways, I'm going to go back to my Ellipse 2 copy layer, Option Command, click drag out. I'm going to do that again, and I'm going to do that yet again for this guy right here. And then, as you might expect, whoa, we are going to do literally the same thing over and over again. Now that one is a little off, so I'm going to use my arrow keys to kind of bump that back. There we go. And again, my smart guys, which are all these purple lines that are popping up, are very useful because they're telling me that, whether or not things are lined up and whether or not they're evenly spaced from one another. And now if I zoom out, I basically, in my layers window, just have a ton of little ellipses. So in order to keep your layers window kind of clutter-free, what you might want to do is if I select my top ellipse, which is right up here, and then I shift click on the bottom ellipse, I can put all of these into a folder, which is usually what I like to do, just keep it a little bit more organized. And I could call this something like dots, just by double clicking there. And now if I turn my original cover off, it's almost impossible to even tell that I'm doing anything because we have basically done such a damn good job recreating this. It looks like pretty much perfect. So again, the pieces that we did first, we filled our background in with that same background color. We then made our ellipse, which is kind of our main circle. And then we made all these little individual rectangles right here, each one filled with its own very specific color. And then finally, we did those series of 10 dots down at the bottom, right down here. Which I guess technically it's 11 dots, right? And that is it. That's the whole album cover, right? Now, if this is something that you wanted to keep and cherish and scrapbook and all that stuff, you go up to File, Save it as a Photoshop file always, which is the default file format. But if it's something that you wanted to share online, and say, hey, I made this, go up to File, Save As, and Tycho covered. Thanks, Nick. Hey. And then instead of Photoshop, you want to save it as a JPEG right here. And then just click Save. And these are just compression options. This is such a simple thing. We just want to just stick with 12. It's going to keep it looking as best as possible. And it's also going to be a really small file size because it's just really simple flat colors. All right, that's it. We made Tycho's Awake cover pretty quickly. That was pretty painless. I hope you enjoyed the video. Stay tuned for much more. I've got some other ones over on my channel. Go check those out. If you've got questions, let me know down in the comments below. If you want to go check out my band, it's oribasmusic.com. And thanks for watching.